In the old days, there could have been some settlements. There were some settlements with the PLO. It's even today with Fatah in the West Bank. They control the area down by Jericho. The Israelis can negotiate more or less with them. There's actually a ceasefire, even a treaty that's been done. There is no treaty with Hamas. Hamas refuses to recognize the right of Israel to exist, to survive. As a matter of principle, they won't do it. And so one of the things that's noticeable is when you hear about Palestinian violence, it's almost always coming out of the Gaza Strip and the areas controlled by Hamas, almost never coming out of the West Bank down by Jericho. Because they're two different ways of looking at the conflict. One is deeply religious, Islamic fundamentalist thing, and the other that's, I hate to use the word moderate, because they're not all that moderate, but relatively speaking, they're moderate, is Fatah or the remnants of the old PLO. But even those guys have lost the momentum. The momentum has gone to Hamas and the fanatics, and so it's made life worse in the Middle East. The same thing true with the rise of ISIS. And the rise of various Islamic fundamentalist groups, Al-Qaeda being the first one that actually brought the conflict to us on our native soil. Why is Islamic fundamentalism on the rise? There are probably a lot of reasons. This is my way of explaining it. Islam for a long time was the most progressive civilization on the face of Earth. It was far in advance of the West. We don't remember that because we don't study much Middle Eastern history in our history books. But there was a time when the West was fairly primitive. Charlemagne, around 800 AD, was the greatest king in Europe, the king of what became the Holy Roman Empire. You may have heard the joke. The Holy Roman Empire, the name fits really well, except for three things. It wasn't holy, it wasn't Roman, and it wasn't an empire. But other than that, it was a pretty respectable thing by the standards of medieval Europe, which had kind of fallen apart. Charlemagne never quite got the hang of writing his name. Okay, that's around 800 AD. But it's called after him. His name was Charles the Great, Charlemagne, Karl der Große, the Carolingian Renaissance, they call it. Well, it was not a bad time by the standards of the Dark Ages. But in the meantime, in the Middle East, around 800 AD, you have the reign of Harun al-Rashid in Baghdad, who is one of the greatest of the Abbasid caliphs. He rules over an empire that extends from almost over to Spain. He lost Spain to another Islamic group, but all the way over past Persia and to India. They were doing algebra in Harun's court. That's where algebra was invented. The very name is Arabic, and the concept of using an X for an unknown quantity, that comes out of Arabic. I won't explain how it got to us that way, but it's in Arabic. It represents an Arabic word. X represents the Arabic word shay, which means a thing. One of the mathematicians who invented algebra, it's from the title of his book, Al-Jabr. His name was Al-Khwarizmi, which survives today in the word algorithm. Okay? You ever heard of an algorithm for a computer? I mean, to take this sort of photographic glance at Charlemagne's court in Aachen and Harun's court in Baghdad, they were completely different. I mean, one was a sophisticated, multinational, cosmopolitan empire with trade relations going all the way over to China and all the way over to Morocco and up into Spain and so on. And Harun was aware that there was a Europe, but didn't think it important enough to pay any attention to. I mean, it's just on a very different scale. But you flash forward a little bit, and the Islamic world falls on hard times. By 1500, they're clearly in decline. By 1800, they are being conquered by European powers. And at first, they hardly recognize what's going on. They've been so used to being on top of things. This is a lesson in humility. A good reason to always, don't assume that you will always be on top of the world, because history doesn't work that way. Empires come and go, and I'm sure the Romans thought they would never lose, but they did, and every empire has eventually declined. But by 1800, the French are moving in. I mean, the French come into Egypt in 1798. They're driven out eventually by the English, not by the Egyptians. That's the important thing. The Egyptians were powerless. They lost one of the heartland countries of the Middle East, right? to Europeans, and the English stayed there for a long, long time. You had the Russians moving in, expanding across into Russian Asia and down into Central Asia, trying to look for a warm water port. They've been looking for that for centuries, right? They just don't have adequate ports. So that's why Russia is still cozy with Iran. It's why Russia invaded Afghanistan. They're always moving southward, trying to get some access to warm water ports. They've got these long coastlines, above the Arctic Circle. Not very useful. They've got, St. Petersburg, but it's on a sea that's bounded by that little narrow, you've been through that strait there, on the sea there, that could be shut off in a heartbeat by Denmark, for heaven's sake, which would block their ports. They've got ports on the Caspian Sea, but have you ever looked at a map there? Caspian Sea, the Black Sea, you can't get anywhere from there. In the Black Sea, you'd have to go down the Bosphorus. Anyone here been to Istanbul? Pretty narrow. Doesn't take much on either side to block Russian shipping. Then you go through the Sea of Marmara, and then you're going out through the Dardanelles, where they could shut you down again. In other words, Russia doesn't have any good ports. So they're desperately trying to get them. They've always been trying to do that. But they're expanding into the Middle East. And the Middle East is powerless to resist. Powerless. And gradually people begin to wake up and say, good grief, what's happened to us? We used to be at the top of the world, and now we're nothing. They hadn't been paying any attention. They literally did not notice the rise of Europe. They hardly noticed the Industrial Revolution when it came. They hardly noticed the Reformation. There's no mention in any Arabic book of which I'm aware, and people have written on the subject trying to find it. There's no mention of the Reformation or the Enlightenment or the Renaissance in any Islamic writing. They didn't notice. To them, Europe was a backwater. Primitive people who lived in skins and ran around in forests. Yeah, they're savages, basically. Good source of raw materials. Other than that, pay no attention to them.